Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rebecca. If you haven't been here before, welcome. It's that time of year again when we're going to be talking about Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. You guys know that I love this show. This will be my 4th year talking about it. This is the 4th season and I'm so excited to dive into it and see what direction they're going to be taking, and I just think that this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm excited to see where it goes. Before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, all those YouTube-y things. It really helps out, and I'm trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So the more of you that subscribe, the more that it helps my channel, and the more of you that watch the videos, that helps a lot too. So even if you watch it once, twice, whatever, send it to a friend. It's really, really helpful, and I love you guys. So thank you so much for supporting me thus far. So yeah, if you're not subscribed and you like this kind of content, or you're interested in books, thrifted fashion, self-love content, that's all stuff that I do, travel, really just kind of like my life and things that I'm interested in. Make sure to subscribe down below, and yeah, make sure to hit that like button. With that being said, let's get into the video and talk about the first episode of season 4. So episode 1 is called Once Upon a Time in the West, and we already know from past seasons that the producers, directors, writers will relate episodes back to themes of other stories from the past. So like last season we had a decent number of plays that were referenced, as well as like Shakespearean plays, and so some of that showed in the current season and like what was going to happen. So it's always really cool to look at the plays, the references, the names of that they are bringing up in the show to see like if it's a clue and where it leads us. So Once Upon a Time in the West is a movie. So this is our first big clue, and we see a couple of hints throughout the episode that show the influence of this movie. The first thing we know from this episode is that Sazz has something that she wants to tell Charles. She like comes up to him at the end of last season and mentions that she's got some like important information she needs to share with him. We also know that Sazz was murdered. It's a gunshot through the window, seemingly some sort of like, I don't know, a sniper? Like, I don't know guns, but like that's what it seems like. So it seems like it was probably done from a distance from another apartment, shooting into Charles's apartment. Very intense way to like clearly an organized crime situation. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't just poison her last minute with some rat poison. They didn't just, you know, shoot her last minute with a gun that they happened to have. They like set up shop in another part of the building and shot her through the window. Very wild. So Sazz also seems to kind of write something in blood. It looks like maybe it's going to be a U or a W, but we don't fully see the shape. We only see like her hand go like this. And we also know that obviously whoever shot her comes into Charles's apartment and cleans up the whole situation. So we're never gonna know unless we get another shot of that moment. One of the first things we see when we're panning onto the trio is like a large poster of Abraham Lincoln. So that's just something to keep in mind for the future. We see that the trio is doing the last bit of their podcast for last season, since they've solved the who murdered Ben Glenroy situation, and we see the power fluctuate, and immediately Oliver says something along the lines of like, oh, that hasn't happened since the old incinerator used to be turned on. Hint hint, nudge nudge. We'll talk more about that later. As they are in the elevator, they're talking about different fruit names because Bev Mellon has reached out and said that she wants to turn their podcast into a movie. So they also mentioned Gilbert Grape, Fiona Apple, and Daryl Strawberry. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about What's Eating Gilbert Grape, because that is a movie and may have given a hint to where this episode was going. What's Eating Gilbert Grape is all about Gilbert and his family. His brother is special needs and he takes care of him, and he's got 2 sisters and his mother who doesn't really leave her house and hasn't left her house since their father died. And so the movie is just like a coming of age story for Gilbert. He meets this girl. There's clearly some sort of like romance between them. But the movie has a lot of hardships with like him needing to take extra care of his brother and not necessarily being able to be as independent as he wants to be because he's still a kid, but he's, you know, acting as a parent. But we also kind of go through the whole movie, and at the end it's pretty sad. His mom ends up dying and they can't get her out of the like top floor of the house. So the next day there's supposed to be like a crane that comes to like lift her out of the house, and they know that the townspeople are going to show up and like laugh and make fun of her for, you know, they're not going to honor her death, they're just going to be dicks about it. So they decide to empty the house and burn it down. And so they burn her body within the home. And so obviously that is a hint for what happens in this episode. And, you know, we know that that was not, maybe that was a hint for another body being burned. We also have Fiona Apple, who grew up bi-coastal, moving between New York and LA, and she has a song called Criminal that was pretty famous. So as far as I could tell, maybe that's the relation between that, because they are kind of flying between New York and LA. And then we've got Darryl Strawberry, who was a baseball player for the Mets. I didn't like really dig into him, so I don't know if there's a lot of like symbolism for him. So next we re-enter Charles's apartment to find that Sazz is no longer there, no body. We see obviously that there are some blood stains that Mabel assumes is wine because the cork has kind of popped, and they end up kind of wiping some of that evidence away. But yeah, Sazz isn't there. We're confused. We're like, what happened? Did she get up and walk away? Did someone break into Charles's apartment? Like, what is going on? Then we go to the opening credits. We see that Howard has a dog, Shock, because he's a cat person. I feel like the little hint here, because they usually have a little hint in the credits, is that Howard has this dog and she's important to this episode. So obviously the title of this episode is Once Upon a Time in the West, and we see that Charles is watching Once Upon a Time in the West when he falls asleep after the gang has kind of like split up. And I just want to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk about what this movie is about. Sorry if you can hear my dog. I'm going to talk about what this movie is about later on because it's important to some of the clues that we talk about. But we also see that Charles is asleep and there's like this, it almost looks like a train is coming towards him, which is what a lot of the movie is about. And then we also hear this like whistling sound, which we know Charles talks about being able to hear this whistling in his apartment and thinking about Sazz because Sazz was a whistler. So the next day we learn that their play, Death Rattle, has been canceled because the funding has been pulled because obviously the producers have gone to jail and they need that money for bail and their defense, I guess. Scout, seriously. If you can hear him chewing his bone, too bad, because that's his joy and he's my joy. So yeah, we hear that the show has been canceled. The only person who's like really upset about this is Oliver. Charles seems to be pretty relieved that he doesn't have to do that again, and Mabel like really wasn't a part of the show. So Howard comes in with his new dog Gravy and introduces her, and she barks a bunch, and we are immediately like, oh, this is probably because she smells blood and can tell that Sazz died here. But we don't know everything about Gravy yet. Obviously it comes out later in the episode. We learn obviously that Paramount wants to make a movie for the podcast, and the trio is trying to figure out if they're going to fly to LA to talk to these movie producers and possibly create a movie about their podcast and them. We hear Charles talk about how he's worried about Sazz and he doesn't know if he can leave because he doesn't know what happened to her. But pretty much immediately as he says that, he gets a text message saying that Sazz had to run back to LA to cover a show for Bacula. And so we kind of assume that Charles thinks, okay, all's good in Sazz's world. She just had to jet off. That's kind of how she is. So the team decides to fly to LA. Something I noticed that I don't know if it really matters, and if anyone knows about like TV production and like who owns who, but like Paramount is getting a ton of shout outs in this episode. You've got the fact that Paramount wants to produce a movie for the trio. You've got the fact that Once Upon a Time in the West is a Paramount film. Paramount is just like constantly talked about in this episode. I don't know if Paramount owns Hulu or if they're like doing a deal or something. I don't know why, but Paramount is just, Hulu's shouting out Paramount left and right. So we're introduced to the directing, writing, production team who's going to be doing the movie, as well as the brothers, sisters who are going to produce the movie. This kooky, these are the brothers, you know, you were there, you saw. We have the whole vibe of them trying to discuss, you know, how much money they want. Charles sliding the number across the table and it's just the number 4. And Mabel walks out because she's pretty overwhelmed by this entire situation and the offer and the way that her character was described, you know, not having a job, not having a home, just kind of like being lost is kind of how Mabel's life's being characterized right now, and she doesn't know if she wants that to be immortalized in this movie because she doesn't want to be that person forever. And this episode does seem to cover the topic of immortalization of people on movie screens and how it translates to who they are in their lives, and if they always, you know, want to be that person, that's how they're represented. It's like a time capsule of who they were. And, you know, as you grow as a person, you don't necessarily want the past you to be the part that's immortalized. Charles brings it up in his voiceover at the beginning of the episode, and we see these really cool home videos of the trio when they were young. But Mabel is dealing with this moment of like, is this who I want to be forever, captured on the screen? When people see me, this is what they're going to think of me as. So we end up getting a fun tour of Hollywood while our faves eat In-N-Out Burger and stand up through the sunroof of the limo and like get the classic Hollywood tour moment. And they end up going to visit Sazz's apartment because Charles is still worried about her. He hasn't heard from her recently, and he's thinking, you know, what's going on? She obviously said she had to jet home, but he still wants to check in on her. So they get to Sazz's door, and they realize pretty quickly that she's not there because there are all these packages that are stuffed into her little area and like into the like mail slot. So Charles pulls them out, looks into the mail slot, and we immediately see that there's this large bunch of roses that are all dead. And so we're like, okay, Sazz hasn't been home in a while. So the trio is kind of like, oh, maybe she had to do a location shoot somewhere with Bakula. Maybe she's not actually here. But she did say she was going to be in LA, and she's not, so they're worried about her. So we then go to a party thrown specifically for the trio to promote the movie and the podcast, and we meet the people who are going to be playing Oliver, Charles, and Mabel on screen. So we've got Eva Longoria, Zach Galifianakis, and I forget the last guy's name, but he was on Schitt's Creek. So we see the trio interacting with their quote-unquote counterparts who are trying to learn as much as they can about the character before they, you know, dive into playing them. And Loretta comes in. She's looking so stunning. She's looking very Hollywood. We have a moment where Eva Longoria is talking to Mabel, and she says to her something along the lines of like, I'm really trying to get into your character and understand, you know, where your character's coming from. And Mabel says like, oh yeah, me too, because she's still really trying to find herself. And I think Mabel is a really great example of, it's really great representation for someone who's in their 30s who still doesn't have life fully figured out. You can be as old as you are, you know, 25, 30, 35, and you don't need to have your life figured out. You don't need to know who you want to be when you grow up. You can still be finding yourself. Eva's advice to Mabel is basically to sell her life rights and ask for a shit ton of money so that when the project is over, she has something to build with, you know, whatever she decides to do in her life. She has this money that she can use to build that dream for herself. And this is basically the advice I would have given Mabel. Like, yeah, give them your life rights, but also, like, make sure you've read the paperwork and that you're asking for a shit ton of money. Next, we flip back to Charles, who thinks that he sees Sazz at the party and he runs after her. Then we switch to Loretta, who basically asks Oliver to move to LA with her. They're in love, but you can tell that he kind of feels like he's holding her back, like he's dragging her down. She's this like huge success who's just been like launched into stardom, and Oliver had his first, Broadway show in forever be canceled after one night and one good review. So you can tell he's feeling like he's not his best self and that maybe he's holding her back. And she says she's so in love with him, and he asks her something along the lines of like, will she, but he ends up cutting himself off, and we're pretty sure he's gonna say like, will she marry him, which I think would be a really fun plotline for the story, especially because last season we didn't get to see Charles and Joy get married. Maybe we will get that sort of like happy ending and love with Oliver and Loretta. We flip back to Mabel, who asks to talk to Melon, and she gives her a piece of mustard yellow paper, of course, because that's Mabel's color. And this is Mabel's request for like what she wants for the movie, like what the only way that they'll get her the rights of her character. And we don't know what is on it, but if I had to guess, it's not just money. It's something more. With Mabel, I could see it being like not a number for money at all, but something along the lines of like, you can have my character rights, but I get to produce the next big movie or something like that. Like, she has an idea for what she wants for herself, and she's going to ask for it on this slip of paper to get to where she wants to go. So it'll be very interesting to see what she has asked for, and I'm sure we'll see it in future episodes. So we go back to Charles, who figures out that the person he is following is not Sazz, but Bacula, and Charles asks about Sazz and is like, have you seen her? She said she was going to, back you at a show, and Bacula says, she never showed up to work. And immediately Charles is like, that doesn't sound like Sazz. She isn't the kind of person to not show up to work. So Charles is now extremely concerned. She has, not been seen since she went back to his apartment. He doesn't know where she went. She claims that she's in LA, but she's not at her house. Bacula hasn't seen her. So Charles is definitely very worried. We see Oliver and Mabel regroup, and Mabel has finally decided to sell the rights to her character, so they are celebrating. And Charles comes up and lets them know that he has some very bad news. And he basically tells them that Sazz is missing and, that she hasn't shown up for work, and he just does not know what's going on with her. So the team decides to go back to Sazz's apartment. Charles, picks the lock, and they explore her place. So one of the first things we see is that she has all these x-rays of broken bones on the wall, and she has named them like my big break, which is my first big break, which is funny because she's a stunt woman, so like she is often breaking bones in her job. And we hear Charles say something about how like the best replacement parts for certain like joints comes from, I forget where he says, but he tells us where her joint replacements are from and says, Sazz always gets the best, blah, blah, blah. We hear something drop, and the trio calls out to see if it's Sazz, and there's no response. So that's very suspicious. Like, is someone in her apartment in the moment that they come in? Why would someone be in her apartment? It's just strange that we hear that noise and it's never addressed. They don't go to check on it or anything like that. They just kind of assume, oh, it was nothing. But was it nothing? That's the real question. So Charles finds all sorts of notes on Sazz's desk, and then Lester calls Charles and says that he got his note about changing the window because there's a hole in the window. Obviously it's a gunshot. And Charles is like, I never made that request. Do not change the window. Like, we need to go back home and check out my apartment because someone is trying to cover their tracks. And as this is happening, Mabel is talking to Howard, who is talking about doing this podcast with Gravy, who was a working girl, back in her old dog days, and Mabel lets Howard know, hey, you know, you're spelling gravy wrong. And he says that gravy was actually a cadaver dog. And so they start to put the pieces together. Why gravy was barking, where this whistling sound was coming from, that someone's trying to cover their tracks. And they all fly home and they peer into the bullet hole that they see. They look at the blood on the stove. They have Howard come in with gravy and the dog barks and then goes all the way to the trash chute or the incinerator chute that is, you know, no longer in use. And they go down to the incinerator, they open it up, they dig through the ash, and what do they find? But the exact joint parts that Sazz uses to replace her broken bones. So our assumption is that Sazz has been thrown into the incinerator and the body has been burned to cover their tracks. And this is also a pullback from the beginning of the episode where the power goes out and they say, oh, hey, that hasn't happened since the old incinerator was turned on. And so we know that at that moment, that is when the killer has thrown Sazz into the incinerator and turned it on. And that's such a crazy callback in like the series of events because we don't know at the beginning of the episode that that's what we're seeing. We're just like, oh, power outage, weird. And the writers and producers and directors of this show were so clever in thinking like, that's the moment. And we're connecting the dots. We're going back and we're saying like, that was the moment that Sazz was incinerated. And this also goes back to that reference to Gilbert Grape and the mother at the end of that movie, them deciding to just burn the house down instead of, you know, allowing the mom to be disrespected in that way because she's passed away and people are going to come and like laugh at her. Instead, they decide to burn the house down and burn her body. And that may have been a hint for the fact that Sazz was thrown into the incinerator. So I love the cleverness, I really do. So Charles texts the person who is claiming to be Sazz back and says, you're not Sazz, who are you? And the texter responds, not your fucking friend. So now we kind of come to the end scenes where we see the new poster of, you know, Only Murders in the Building, the movie, and we also see this old Belgium premium lager, these like beers. And so we can kind of assume that these are clues, you know, what does this lager have to do with it? I don't remember, you know, seeing Sazz with it or hearing that she liked it, but if any of you have watched previous episodes and remember seeing her with it or remember seeing it at all, comment down below and let me know, because we're all, you know, trying to figure this out together. At the very end, we hear a slight whistling through the window, and we know, once again, that this is the whistling that Charles heard when he said that he thought he could hear Sazz whistling in his apartment and that it's coming through this little hole in the window. So there's two options here. One option is that they were trying to kill Charles. They saw Sazz. She's been his stunt double before. They thought that Sazz was Charles and they shot her accidentally. The other option is that they intentionally were going after Sazz. They knew where she was going to be. They somehow knew she was going to go back into his apartment, and she had knowledge that they wanted to keep from getting out because she specifically tells Charles that she knows something. So those are kind of the two options. We're not sure which is which. It's kind of unlikely that they knew exactly where Sazz was going to be when she was going to his apartment, but maybe they were tracking her through the windows or something and saw that she was going to his apartment alone and they were like, this is our opportunity. Or maybe they thought she'd already told the information to Charles, and so they were like, we have to take him out before he, you know, releases it on his podcast. So we don't even know who the intended victim really was here. So next, let's talk about the notes on Sazz's desk, because these are like huge clues for the trio and for us as to what Sazz knew and what all these notes mean. So I noted down all the notes I could see. If you saw any more and you want to drop them down in the comments below, things you saw, definitely comment them, because, you know, there's always something I'm gonna miss. So we've got the 5.5 Lesbian Brothers Invitational Golf Tournament, and on it, Sazz has written long game. We've got a ticket for a flight from LAX to JFK, Group A, Seat 5A, with the name Helga written on it. We've got a salad and a sandwich receipt delivered to 111 Hancock Park, Los Angeles, with the words 2 notes written on it and underlined. We've got the number 11 crossed out, 13 crossed out, 26 question mark, 14 question mark, 86 question mark written on a napkin. We've got a post-it note that says 773440, which is maybe a combination code or like the code to a safe. We've got the name Dudenoff question mark written on another piece of paper. We've got a little yellow folder with West Tower Arconia written on it. We've got a trampoline instructions kit, a bunch of scripts with a photo of Bacula pinned to the front called Access Denied, the future is terminal, which we can assume is like the show that they were shooting. We've got a note that says cancel doctor appointment for Thursday at 10 a.m. out of town the 23rd. A note on an envelope that says looking at Charles, underlined a few times. A book for stunt woman workouts, and a note that says sick pup on it. So all of these things are clues. We obviously have Sazz's handwriting, which has been an important part of the show in the past, as well as all these different clues. When it says looking at Charles, that note kind of indicates that either she was suspicious of Charles or she knew that she had to talk to Charles and tell him this information. These are some really cool clues that I hope they come back to during the rest of the season. We already know that for episode 2, they're going to go searching the west wing of the Arconia to try and figure out what Sazz was looking for. And I wanted to talk about Once Upon a Time in the West because this movie is about, I've never watched it, but as far as I could tell from the summary, it's about there's a train line that's being built through this town, and this man owns a house that's right next to the train. So he wants to build a watering station to be able to profit off of, his property being right there. And so he starts to build it and someone murders him. They shoot him far range. So that could be a throwback, a call out to how Sazz was killed. And then we've also got this man who's called Harmonica, who's played by, I think his name's Charles Hogan. Oh, so Charles Bronson plays Harmonica. That's the actor. So we've got this call out to Charles because that's, one of our trio's names. And so we are thinking that maybe Charles relates to Harmonica in some way, but the basis is that Harmonica is looking for this bad guy. The bad guy is the one who, has killed this family in order to steal their property so that this big corporation can own it. The guy who owns, I think, the railroad tracks. And so it's a lot about property and killing people to own property, to profit off of it. And I think that this is really interesting and kind of calls back to, was it season 2 of Only Murders in the Building, when we saw that there was this big structure that was going to be built on top of the Arconia, that was the plans they had for the building, and we never really went anywhere with that or figured out why this was, a part of the show. But we did hear that Bunny was very against it, and this was one of the motives that we had for why someone might take Bunny out, because she was against the building of this new portion of the Arconia that was going to be very modern and maybe profitable for someone in particular. We don't know who. But so this is all very interesting. And so that's kind of the vibe of Once Upon a Time in the West. I know I didn't do the best job at explaining it. I think the most important parts are the fact that this is kind of a movie about owning property and killing people to get it in order to profit off of it, as well as the main character Harmonica being played by this man Charles Bronson. And then we do learn that Harmonica had this vendetta against the bad guy from when they were kids, I think, and his brother was killed. If you know the movie, feel free to comment the summary down below. And so that kind of leads me to my first and only prediction for what this season is going to be about and why Sazz was killed. So as I mentioned, in season 2 of Only Murders in the Building, we saw that someone had a plan to build this like big structure on top of the Arconia. I'll add photos so we can kind of remember what I'm talking about. And so I think that possibly my prediction is that this season is going to be about the fact that Sazz was killed because she knew that someone was trying to build this structure on top of the Arconia, and so they killed her because she had information about it. I think that's why there's a note that says, you know, West Wing Arconia, because maybe that's where they were going to build it or where the information lies. And I think that the person who wants to build this thing and profit off of it knows that like Charles and a lot of people will be against it, and they're willing to do anything to make it happen because it will make them extra money. So that's my current prediction, just based off of what we got in this episode and what I've seen in the past. There's a lot of unanswered questions from season 1 to season 4, things that have been brought up that like were never brought up again. And my hope is that we start to see some of those things being tied back into in the last 2 seasons, because I think they said they're only going to go up to season 5. So I'd really like to see there be some full circle tying back in of the clues that we saw at the beginning. Anyway, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, like I said, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube things, leave a comment, like. It's so important for the video and for my channel, and it really helps more than you even know. You know, send the video to a friend, put it on in the background and watch it again. Whatever you're willing to do, I'm so thankful. I love you guys so much, and I really appreciate you sticking with me and watching these videos and celebrating this show that we all love so much and that we have so much fun trying to solve ourselves. And if you have any theories of who you think the killer is or how you think past seasons' clues are going to tie back into this season, please leave them in the comments down below. I love to see your theories. Thank you again. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Oh, and one more thing. I will not be posting next week because I'm going to be away. At least I don't think I'm going to be posting. So week 2 will probably be a skip, and I'll be back for week 3. If that changes, I'll post on the community board and let you know. But I love you guys, and I will see you when I see you.